2021 was definitely a challenging year for a lot of people. It was the year just after the coronavirus pandemic, and for a lot of people, it was a period when we needed to adjust to the new normal. For the Miami real estate industry, however, 2021 wasn't the best year for sure. This was the year when the Champlain Building, a 12-story structure in Miami's Surfside region, crumbled to the very ground. A lot of discoveries have been made since the crash of this building.
All sitting there in the living room, my whole family, Diane, my mother, and we were just shocked.
However, one of the most notable was the one concerning Arnie and Miriam Notkin, a couple that was said to have gotten some ominous calls just before the crash.
Jake says his mother's house line has been receiving calls from the Notkins' home line, and this is what they hear on the other end of it.
In this video, we'll be looking at the mysterious case of this couple, as well as what happened to them. Champlain Towers South. Before we begin to go into the spooky details of this story, it might be worth understanding a little background of this whole thing. Champlain Towers South was a residential condominium building that was located at 8777 Collins Avenue in the town of Surfside, just north of Florida's famous Miami Beach. Completed in 1981, the condo building was part of a complex that comprised 3 buildings, including Champlain Towers North and Champlain Towers East, completed in 1982 and 1984, respectively. Each of these buildings was an L-shaped structure that had 12 stories, although as of 2021, the Champlain South building had expanded so much that it now had 136 units in total. To be honest, this expansion appeared to have been part of the major issues that plagued the Champlain South Tower. It even had a rooftop penthouse with units all varying in size from 1,200 to 4,500 square feet in size. That penthouse was an especially controversial part of the Champlain Towers South's design, as its developers needed to get an exemption because the building had already exceeded its allotted height limit. And because it wasn't part of the original building permits, you can imagine how much its developers had to pull strings just to get it erected. As far back as its inauguration in the early 80s, Champlain South was developed by William M. Friedman and Associates Architects. Combined with several consulting and construction engineers, the architecture firm was able to get this building built, and it thus became the first new construction in Surfside, following a moratorium on new development that had been imposed by Miami-Dade County. The deadly crash. On the 24th of June, 2021, at approximately 22 minutes past 1 in the morning, the entire structure of Champlain Towers South experienced a complete breakdown. The entire thing happened like a scene out of a horror movie. The pool deck of the building was the first to go, suffering a partial collapse at about 1:14 in the morning, and from there, the central section and eastern wing of the building went down about 8 minutes later. In literally less than 10 seconds, the entire building went down. According to surveillance footage, it appeared that there had already been a collapse at a large north-central section of the building. And because of this, a part of the northeast corner of the building had also become destabilized. This section collapsed just 9 seconds later, leading to the destruction of a large portion of the 136 units in the building. Investigative reports found that a major contributing factor to the collapse of the building happened to be the long-term degradation of the reinforced concrete structural support in the basement-level parking garage under the pool deck. Experts posited that the penetration of water, as well as the corrosion of the reinforcing steel, had caused the entire structure to become very weak. Interestingly, the issues had actually been reported as far back as 2018. But for some reason, the authorities and developers didn't necessarily see a need to act expeditiously. A program for remedial works valued at $15 million had been approved before the collapse of the building, but the main structural work on the project had not even started yet. Besides this, other factors that were pointed out included land subsidence, a lack of sufficient reinforcing steel, and possible issues with construction that had not been raised. Response and rescues. Befitting an accident as terrible as this, the response was swift and comprehensive. On the same day of the accident, Over 80 rescue units had responded to the Champlain South Tower collapse, according to a report by the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Department. 10 people were treated at the scene, while one person was reported dead and 2 people were taken to a nearby hospital. The hospitalized victims, a mother and a daughter, had apparently fallen from the 9th to the 5th floor, and while they had a few injuries, they ultimately survived. That same day, at least 35 people were rescued, with a further 159 people being unaccounted for. Immediately, Miami-Dade County Mayor Daniela Levine Cava signed a state of emergency declaration while also encouraging Governor Ron DeSantis to do the same at the state level. Subsequently, the governor acquiesced and made a similar declaration. Despite the incredible toll of it all, rescue efforts came in droves. From 2 FEMA Urban Search and Rescue Task Force teams and the Urban Search and Rescue Florida Task Force 1, based in the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue, to the country of Israel and even the Miami Heat, everyone lent a hand in one way or the other. And it was really heartwarming to see communities coming together to help in this dire hour. 2 days later, the Miami-Dade Mayor's office had reported that 127 people had been accounted for, with the death toll rising to 4. The other 2 Champlain buildings were evacuated to ensure that a repeat of the accident didn't happen, and with federal assistance, the search and rescue efforts were bolstered even more. By the start of July, rescue workers had discovered a total of 24 deceased victims, with the number of missing people now dropping to 121. The death toll unfortunately continued to rise, going as high as 97 by July 15th, while the number of missing people had now been revised to 8 individuals. Finally, the Miami-Dade Fire Department left the area by July 23rd and discontinued the recovery effort. 3 days later, the final missing person was identified, with the death count standing at 98. To date, the Surfside collapse, as the incident has now been called, remains tied with the Knickerbocker Theater collapse as the 3rd deadliest non-deliberate structural engineering failure in the history of the United States. It stands behind the Hyatt Regency Hotel collapse in Kansas City back in 1981 and the collapse of the Pemberton Mill in Lawrence, Massachusetts, back in 1860. The 2 events saw death tolls of 114 and 145, respectively, with their injury counts hitting 216 and 166 at the same time. Arnie and Miriam Notkin. As you can imagine, the collapse of the Champlain South Tower was a truly devastating event. However, amongst the many victims, there were 2 who especially stood out among the crowd. A couple that apparently had a bit of a strange encounter just before their building, and ultimately their lives literally came crashing down. Arnold Arnie and Maria Miriam Notkin were what you'd call a classic American love story. Arnie was born in Rochester, New Hampshire in May 1934, and even from a young age, he had an insatiable passion for sports and being active. Despite being born far away, Arnie moved to South Florida to attend the University of Miami in the 50s. He eventually graduated from the institution, heading to the Army to serve during the Korean War. He earned his master's in science from Nova Southeastern University, and after he graduated, he began a career as a physical education teacher and coach. He eventually had a very long career as a physical education teacher at several schools, including Miami Beach's Leroy D. Feinberg Elementary School, where he helped train hundreds of kids in different sports. Arnie was a man of the people, and all across the area, he had built a bit of a reputation for that. So naturally, he was incredibly popular. As for Miriam, she had actually left Cuba for Florida back in the 50s. Following Cuba's takeover by the communist government, there was a massive wave of immigrants that arrived in Florida. Miriam and her family were among these immigrants, and she built a life for herself in the Sunshine State as a banker and a real estate agent before she eventually retired. The 2 of them actually didn't meet each other initially. In fact, they had been married before meeting each other, with the 2 of them even having children in their former marriages. But by the summer of 1993, their paths crossed, and it was pretty much love at first sight. That same year they got married. Hey, why wait when you found the love of your life, am I right? In 1994, Arnie and Miriam moved into the third floor of the Champlain South Tower. The two probably planned to grow old here, and that was what they set out to do. Sadly, life had other plans for them, and when the building came crashing down in 2021, they were caught up in it. As if to go into the afterlife together, Arnie and Miriam's bodies were identified on the very same day, July 9th. And as you'd imagine, it was too late to save them. Condolence messages poured from all over the community, especially with the couple being especially popular amongst the locals. The mysterious calls. However, amid the mourning and investigations, a strange theme occurred. A few days following the collapse, while rescue missions were still being conducted, Jake Samuelson, one of the Notkins' grandchildren, explained that his mother had been getting calls from Arnie and Miriam's home line ever since the building crashed. According to reports, Arnie and Miriam had a landline that was situated just next to their bed, and as Jake explained, that line had been repeatedly calling his mother's phone ever since the collapse happened.
Jake says his mother's house line has been receiving calls from the Notkins' home line, and this is what they hear on the other end of it.
Now, that's weird, isn't it? How is it that the phone that was placed by Arnie and Miriam's bedside still managed to make calls even after the entire building crashed and the phone was supposed to have been destroyed? And to make things worse, why is it that there is no human response on the other end? This story gets spookier, however. According to Jake, his mother had received a total of 16 calls by the time the report got out. The first of those calls came on the day the building collapsed.
All sitting there in the living room, my whole family, Diane, my mother, and we were just shocked, and we kind of thought nothing of it because we answered it was static.
From there, the family apparently went to the location of the collapse the next day. The calls just kept coming, 15 of them in fact, all with the same outcome. No response on the other end, and just static sounds. As you can imagine, each of those calls would only have been more gut-wrenching than the last. And Jake even described what it felt like to experience such a harrowing thing.
We're just trying to rationalize what's happening here, and we're just trying to get answers.
Of course, the family did get closure when they found out eventually that Arnie and Miriam had sadly been killed in the collapse. Still, the eerie calls are definitely enough to have anyone spooked. So far, there has still not been any explanation for what caused these calls. And to be honest, no one really knows if any explanations can be found. Considering the fact that Arnie and Miriam were both in their 80s when the collapse happened, there's a high chance that they were killed instantly. So it seems rather odd that any of them would have been trying to make an emergency call. And even if someone was, why didn't they say anything? The case of Arnie and Miriam Notkin was definitely one of the stranger parts of the entire Champlain Tower's South collapse. And with answers still eluding us all, who knows what was behind these calls? What do you think, though? Was someone trying to get help, or was this just a technical issue? Let us know in the comments.